Welcome in to Vol Basketball Fever, your number one source for discussions about the Vols and Lady Vols basketball programs. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video, and check in every week for new episodes of the show, video breakdowns, and more. Now, on with the episode. Hello everyone, and welcome in to another episode of Vol Basketball Fever. I am Nathanael Rutherford, joined once again, finally back on the show, Gene Henley. Gene, it's good to have you back on the show, buddy. Missed you.
I appreciate it, man. Certainly glad to be back. Busy summer, productive summer. But, I think, we were just talking about football coaches before that we started, and I think it's nice to kind of have some level of normalcy back in the world, which means football on the weekends and talking basketball here during the week.
Yeah, it may be football time in Knoxville because now fall camp has started, and you and I were talking, Chattanooga starts their fall camp on Friday, so it may be football time in Tennessee, but it's always going to be basketball time here on the podcast and on the show. So again, thank you all for tuning in here to Vol Basketball Fever. If you're on YouTube, we'd appreciate if you like this video and share it around, and subscribe to the channel if you're here as well and you haven't subscribed yet. If you listen to just audio only, again, appreciate that too. No matter how you're consuming the show, we're very appreciative of you. Over 400 subscribers now on YouTube, which again, it's not like a giant amount, but that's significant to me. It's 400 people who have found the show, I guess worthy enough to subscribe to. So thank you all so much for the support. It really means a lot to me. This is someone who just kind of started this for fun, and y'all have given me a lot of good feedback and have been really loyal supporters of the show for, oh gosh, Gene, we've been doing this for, well, I guess technically with the SEC podcast was 2 years, but we're doing the UT one for a little over a year now at this point. I guess a year, about 14, 15 months or so. So very appreciative of everyone for the support. But Gene, you haven't talked in a while, but there's been, I guess some basketball news. It's not been bad to not, you've been busy because there's not been a whole lot to talk about for the men's side of things for UT basketball. But right now, the kind of the hottest topic worth discussing is Tennessee and the recruiting trail. And it's not been because Tennessee's had, at least lately, and lately I mean like the last couple weeks, they haven't been hot on the recruiting trail because they've been hot over the last few years in terms of, historically speaking for Tennessee, looking at who they've landed, guys like Julian Phillips, Kennedy Chandler, those aren't players Tennessee was landing, really, 5 years ago, but especially 10, 15, 20 years ago, that's not the type of guys Tennessee, was able to pick up most of the time in the consecutive classes, especially. But lately, it's been a lot of kind of swinging and missing for some Tennessee's top targets in the 23 class, especially. You had arguably Tennessee's number one target in the 23 class, Justin Edwards, number 3 overall player, according to 247. Not just not choose Tennessee, Gene, but he chose Kentucky, which, is a gut punch in itself. I remind a lot of people of Cason Wallace from last year's class, the 22 cycle, who Tennessee felt like they had the lead with for a long time, and then Kentucky came in kind of late, and they can do that. They're a blue blood, came in and really kind of put the pressure on later and picked up Cason Wallace, and kind of the same thing with Justin Edwards. Tennessee felt like they were in a really good spot for a long time with Justin Edwards, and then Kentucky was able to bring in a late surge and pick him up. Because Kentucky, for one, can do that, but now also with NIL, Kentucky's got a lot of NIL money for basketball. Mark Stoops, maybe not in football. He's made some comments about that the last few weeks. But John Calipari is not having any issues with NIL money for basketball. And then also the other player who just committed, I guess, a couple of days ago, now that we're recording this on a Tuesday night, Aiden Holloway, point guard in the 23 class, who Tennessee is really targeting, one of their top prospects in the 23 cycle they were targeting, committed to Auburn, which again, that one was one that we were asked about, I think maybe last episode we did, Gene, possibly, or at least the last mailbag episode we did. And I said even then it felt like it was trending towards Auburn. So that one was a little bit more of it's felt that way for a while that it was going to be Auburn. But Justin Edwards was more of a, I'd say kind of a gut punch because it felt like Tennessee had really good momentum and it was in a very good spot there for a long time. And then Kentucky sweeps in and gets them. Right now you have Cade Phillips committed to you in the 23 class, which we talked about when he committed. I like him as a player. I think he's got a pretty high ceiling, 6'9", 200 pounds, and top 100 player in the class. Out of Branson, Missouri, he plays for Lincoln Academy over there, so he's not actually from Branson, Missouri, I don't think, but he plays for Lincoln Academy. But there was an interesting piece. We'll try to go back and actually find the quote, the actual writing on it, but on Tony Basilio's blog, which I know some people aren't the biggest Tony Basilio fan, but I do think his basketball insights sometimes are interesting and worth mentioning. He had an interesting point on there talking about Rod Clark, one of Tennessee's assistant coaches under Rick Barnes, being kind of the guy that's been swimming in these deeper waters for Tennessee and, going head to head with the Kentuckys, with the Dukes for some of these prospects that Tennessee has kind of swung and missed on over the last few years. And it, saw different discussions online about being kind of frustrated with it and, saying that, well, Rod Clark is, if he's swinging and missing all these times, maybe he needs to reevaluate or do that, or maybe he needs to be let go, all this different stuff, just different conversation, kind of frustration and venting. And I get it. Fans vent, they have strong emotions. So they're called fanatics for a reason. But I also think, Gene, that while I get the frustration, I understand where some of the fans are coming from that. I also think it's worth kind of taking a step back and reevaluating and looking at the men's basketball program in general. And 10 years ago, if Tennessee had been second place to Kentucky and Duke for a prospect, I would have thought, wow, that's pretty impressive. Now it's kind of like you're expecting more, but at the same time, still, like, I think that even still is a step forward for Tennessee basketball, on the men's side at least, that you're actually really legit, like not just kind of a pity hat on the table like sometimes we saw under, well, name your head coach for Tennessee football, where you'd see the hat on the table, but you weren't going to get picked. Tennessee really has had more than just a hat on the table for a lot of these guys who've been, picking these other blue blood programs over the Vols recently. I just kind of wanted to talk with you about it because you and I feel like I've had some really fruitful discussions about recruiting in the past, especially with Tennessee going head to head with schools like Kentucky. I'm not really like definitely not ready to hit a panic button, but I'm not even like super, super concerned. Justin Edwards would have been a massive, get for Tennessee. That would have been, I mean, number 3 player in the country. He would have been the highest rated prospect Tennessee's ever gotten in the modern recruiting era. But just because you missed out on him doesn't mean, this class is going to be a disaster. You still got guys like JP Estrella, who is a high 4-star, borderline top 50 prospect, a 6'11", 210 center who would be a very talented big man offensively, especially for Tennessee. You have a guy like Silas DeMary Jr., who is a combo guard, I think probably more of a point guard type of guy, who is almost a borderline top 100 player. Freddie DeLeon, if I'm saying his name correctly, also a combo guard, point guard, who is a top 100 player, who Tennessee is in on, and I think is in a decent spot with him right now. You have an in-state prospect who's kind of moving up recruiting boards, and Jared Hall, who's a 6'8", 190 forward, also in the class. You've got guys, too, like Owen Carr, who's built similarly to Justin Edwards at 6'7", 200 over in Greenville, South Carolina. So just because you've missed out on these guys, to me, like, again, doesn't mean the class is going to be bad. It's just, yes, it's frustrating to see Tennessee swing and miss as a fan on these highly rated prospects, but also, like, if you go and snag a 3 or 4 top 100 kind of borderline top 50 prospects, Gene, a lot of times those guys are the guys that stick around for more than one season. And I've also seen a lot of complaints about the one and dones not being great for Tennessee. So I don't know, like maybe you do want to kind of readjust and go after more of those top 100, top 75 guys, and maybe not as many of the top 25, top 30 guys, because the other guys are the ones that are more than likely the ones that stick around for 2 or 3 years. And that helps you have a lot more sustainability of a program, especially nowadays when so many transfers are happening year in and year out too.
Right. And this it's funny because this is a conversation that was had about a year ago, and I posed the question, what is Tennessee's end game in recruiting? Are you simply going to go after these kids who are likely one and done types? Or like who do you want to benefit more? Do you want to benefit the feel good of winning a recruiting battle, or the not so feel good if you win that recruiting battle and that kid leaves 8 months later? I don't know. Fans would know far better than I do there. Said it. Like, Tennessee built their reputation off of the Grant Williams and Admiral Schofields and Jordan Bones and Fulkersons and all those guys in the world, guys who have stayed for multiple years. The vast majority of those guys that you're going after now aren't going to stay longer than maybe a year or two. You'll occasionally get a 5-star sort of player that will hang around, see Josiah, but Like if you want to get the flashy sort of types, um, what's his name, Phillips, the kid that
Yeah.
just is there now, freshman.
Hmm.
If you want to
Julian
get the
Phillips.
flashy,
Yeah.
right? If you want to get those sorts of players, um, I just don't know how long you're going to be able to keep those players. Maybe 11 months, maybe a year. If they commit in April of 2022, are they still there in April of 2023? And look, I mean, I get it. Like, some of these recruiting battles, you want to win them all. You want to compete in all of them. And if you finish second in it, like, is it? I don't think it makes anybody feel any better to finish second um, in anything in life. It probably stinks to lose out to Kentucky, but I think that Kentucky has a much, much longer track record of sending players of that kid's caliber directly to the league after a year, whereas Tennessee has never done that with a 6'8" wing ever. No, Tobias, I'm sorry, has done it one time in the past, in its history, probably. Sent a legit professional wing to the league after 1 year, and that's what you're fighting against. Maybe if Julian Phillips goes and has success this year and parlays that into a lottery selection, then you would have two, and you would have your last one. So that would help you in 2024 and beyond. But it stinks. You want to be able to get in the game of all these guys, and it feels good to be in the game. You love the rush of being in the game. You love the rush of seeing that a kid has visited. But I personally kind of think that Tennessee is going to be best served as a program that'll occasionally get the legitimately great prospects, and what will more than likely, settle with a bunch of guys. I don't want to say settle, that sounds bad, but we'll mostly end up with a bunch of guys who are in the 20s, 20 to 50 range. And let's be clear, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I mean, what was Phillips? Was Phillips top 10 in the country?
He was around that 14, 15 mark on most recruiting sites.
Right. And like has Tennessee ever gotten a top 10 recruit?
I guess Tobias Harris, I think, is the only one, at least according to like the 247. Yeah.
And I'm guessing Vincent was floating around. I think he finished around 15 or 16, but I know at one point he was top 10. So not a ton of success of getting top 10.
Yeah, let's see. I'll look it up while you're. Actually, I've got to put it up right here. Tobias, again, this is 247. I don't have rivals in front of me, but Tobias was number 6 overall. Scotty Hobson was number 7 overall in the country. And then on the 247 composite, Kennedy Chandler ended up number 9. So those are your only ones that Tennessee got their top 10 on 247. I don't think they have. I think Vincent was basically kind of right before 247 really started doing it.
That was class of 98. So that was before 247 became a thing. But the question is, how are you going to consistently get in? Because it's not like this is a club that is exclusive to only. But 5-star has a wide range of meanings. What is it? Top 30 prospects?
Yeah,
essentially. Yeah. So you're in the 5-star game, but there's 5 stars and then there's 5 stars. You can be Josiah or you can be Cade Cunningham. Look, I get it. You love Josiah, and Tennessee fans should love Josiah. He's a really good player. But there was not a person in the country that watched Cade Cunningham play basketball. I'm just throwing a name out. Tennessee was never in that game either. They got his brother. That was a done deal. But that was a kid that the second he got there, you're like, okay, we're going to enjoy these 8 months. There's Josiah and then there's Kennedy Chandler. Let's just go that route. Like, there's levels to the quote unquote 5-star. And like, for me personally, I found it interesting a while back. Actually, not a while back. It was like, I saw the quote over the weekend. It was D'Angelo Russell, and made the comment that basketball players are more athletes than like pure basketball players. And you see that in recruiting rankings. And I mean, as a person who has watched a lot of bad AAU basketball for the past 4 months, it is a lot about athleticism. And like the thing that I think I appreciate the most about a kid named like Josiah is the fact that he is a legitimately great basketball player. He is a good athlete, but he is a legitimately great basketball player that has no flaws in his game. Now, that's not going to necessarily get you drafted, top 6, top 7, whatever. But that's the sort of player that will have a long career, whatever he does. But look at the highest levels, when we look at these recruiting rankings and stuff, a lot of it's based off of just how flashy you are, like how athletic are you, not necessarily how good of a basketball player you are, because everybody's like, well, we can just develop the basketball player. Can't always do that, especially when you're going to have kids for 8 months. I think Tennessee's in a good spot. I've kind of had it, while you were talking, I was looking down and, reading some of the people they had kind of gone after. I think I've seen a few of these players. I've certainly heard some. I think the Australian was the name that I've heard of. I may have seen him somewhere. Like they're going after really good basketball players. I don't care about their ranking or anything like that. Like, the couple of those guys I've seen, those are really good basketball players. And as long as you're going to consistently get those 4-star prospects, and you occasionally get yourself 1 or 2, or maybe have 3 5-star prospects on a roster, on any given season with a bunch of 4s, you're going to give yourself a chance to compete into the second and third weekend in the NCAA tournament, which is what I've always gathered this is all about. Not winning a battle on August 2nd, August 1st, end of July. That has nothing to do ultimately with the season. Because last time I checked, it ain't like Kentucky's out here killing it from November to March either.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, you don't get trophies and hang banners for, winning recruiting battles and winning things in June, July, August, September for basketball, because that's, those aren't as important months for basketball as they are for football, for example. You get trophies and hang banners for things you do in March and April. And like I said, Tennessee and Kentucky, either one, have done a whole lot of that lately. At least Tennessee was able to hang get a trophy and add to their banner for the SEC tournament title they got this past year. Kentucky couldn't do that. Auburn, I guess they won the regular season title, but you get my point. Like, at least Tennessee had that this past season, which to me makes it one of the more successful seasons Tennessee's had recently. You technically can hang a banner or add a year to the Sweet 16, banner you have hanging in, for the last 2019 when Tennessee last went, but I don't know. Like, I think your point is well made there. It's not always about landing a bunch of top 10, top 15, top 20 guys. I mean, you look at, I know it was COVID, and I still think that played a large role in it, but look at last time Tennessee had 2 one-and-done guys on the roster. It wasn't a spectacular season. It wasn't the worst season Tennessee's ever had, but it wasn't, I think, didn't live up to expectations. And again, I do think COVID played a pretty large role in that, and it's hard to say it didn't, based off of, just the chemistry and not being able to practice and having so much new on that team too. But you look at this year's team right now, Gene, and it's built off of a lot of guys who have been in the system for 2, 3, 4 years. Josiah, he's entering his 4th year. Vescovy is entering his 4th year. You have a guy in Zakai Ziegler who's entering his 2nd year, but a guy who's already a fan favorite because I think they feel pretty, fans feel pretty confident that Ziegler is not going to be, he's not bolting after this year. He doesn't have the elite measurables of a guy that's going to be able to make it in, the NBA. So he's probably here for 4 years, and it's going to be 4 years that I think Vol fans are just going to love of Ziegler. But those are kind of your mainstays. And you have Camwa, who's also, again, been here. This will be his 4th year. Urosh, this will be his 4th year also, at least his 3rd. I think it's his 4th. But those are your main guys. Yeah, those are your main guys. And you can throw in, Jonas Adu in there, but he's, and I think he will battle for the starting spot. But you're not really, I mean, aside from a Tyreek Key and Julian Phillips, this year, you're not asking a whole lot of newcomers to do a whole lot. Last year, you weren't really asking too many newcomers to do a whole lot. You obviously had Kennedy Chandler be your everyday point guard and play a ton of minutes, and you did end up relying on Zakai Ziegler to be a big piece of your team as the season went on. But even then, that season, you had, again, Vescovy and James, who'd been there for a couple years, Fulkerson, who'd been there for a million years, Camwa, who was in his 3rd year, Urosh was in his 3rd year, Justin Powell, I guess, who was a transfer in, but Victor Bailey, who had been there for 3 years at that point, too. So, I mean, you even last year was a more veteran-laden team that had some really good, talented young guys in there, especially with Kennedy Chandler playing. I think this year's going to be, again, kind of more the same. That's why I'm not expecting as massive of a drop-off this year, because you have Julian Phillips as your main kind of newcomer you're expecting, to do things. And then you have Tyreek Key, who's already apparently gotten some, praise and stuff from coaches and practice and stuff, kind of like what Zakai Zeger was last year, not to the same degree because Key's been in college for years at this point, but he's already, I think, garnering a lot of praise from Tennessee's coaches internally, from just different rumblings that I've seen posted online from, people who are connected with the basketball program. So you're, again, not relying on a whole lot of new to come in and have to be big time contributors. You're going to, the biggest spot, obviously the biggest question mark to me is point guard. Can Ziegler be the main guy the whole season? Can BJ Edwards be a confident backup out there for him? And then does Tennessee, do they go out and get, another guy, whether it's a reclass or another transfer or whatever? But all of that to kind of get to my point, which is what I had said it, you kind of built off of it there, is that you don't, it's nice to win those recruiting battles. And again, if Justin Edwards comes to Tennessee, that would be huge. I'm not trying to downplay it at all. That was a swing and a miss by Tennessee, but it wasn't for lack of trying. It wasn't because the NIL wasn't in line for Tennessee. It wasn't because Tennessee did something wrong. It was because they lost out to Kentucky, who's one of the top 3, I would say, probably men's basketball programs in college basketball history. I mean, it's them, Duke, and North Carolina, and Kansas are kind of the 4 main ones you probably automatically think of. At least, I guess, really historically, you would have to say UCLA also, but they haven't, done as much in the last 20, 30 years. But again, Kentucky's top 5 all time in prestige for men's basketball. Tennessee, not even close to that. They're maybe, I don't even say they're second in the SEC, because I would throw in, you could throw in Arkansas, who's won, had that big run in the 90s they had, especially. Of course, they've been pretty good lately, too. So, and Florida had their run in the 2000s. So, I mean, I don't know that you could even say Tennessee historically is number 2 in the SEC, period. So, you can make a case for it. But I think that if Justin Edwards comes to Tennessee, it'd be huge. I'm not trying to downplay that at all. I just think that just because you missed out on these guys, have missed out on a Casey Wallace, and missed out on Aiden Holloway, missed out on a Paolo Banchero, for example. That year with Kennedy Chandler could have been monstrous from a recruiting haul of Tennessee. They got Kennedy. They also could have gotten Jabari Smith. They could have gotten Paolo. Like, those are guys that Tennessee was recruiting pretty hard, and they felt really good about where they were with Paolo for a while until, he ended up going to Duke. But, again, you mentioned it, Gene. I don't care what the rankings say. A guy like JP Estrella may not be a 5-star right now, but he is a very talented player. He's a guy that Duke, he was interested in Duke, and then they took another big man who was, I think, a top 10 player in the country, and he said, no, I'm not going pursuing them anymore. Now it looks like it's Iowa and Syracuse. So they're the 2 schools that are really, I think, heavily involved with him, along with Tennessee. A guy like Cohen Carr is a very talented player. Again, the other 2 mentioned, Silas Demery Jr. and Freddie DeLeon, are also really talented players. You get those guys in the top kind of 100 area. Those are still some very good players. I mean, I'm looking at, again, some of Tennessee's recent haul, or not really recent, just looking at 247, their all-time rankings for Tennessee. Chris Lofton, which, funny enough, that's about kind of around where I guess the recruiting rankings really started. He was a 4-star. He was a top 150 overall player. I would say that, he outperformed his ranking. But a guy like Trey Golden was a top 100 prospect to Tennessee land. I think he was a very good player for Tennessee while he was here. You look at a guy like, Wayne Chisholm, for example. He's a top 50 prospect. I think, again, he wasn't a 5-star, but he was a top 50 player, at least on 247. That's kind of to me, a pinnacle of, if you're in that range. I know Jarnell Stokes was a 5-star by some, I think by Rivals, but he wasn't on 207. He was the number 41 player in the class on 207. The guys like the Wayne Chisholms, the Jarnell Stokes, the Jordan McRae's, who I'm looking at, who I think Jordan and Jarnell both were 5-stars by at least one service. But those are all guys that, they weren't one and done players. They were guys who were here for 3, sometimes 4 years. And we remembered them because not only were they here for 3 or 4 years, but they were pretty darn good when they were here for the 3 or 4 years, and are scattered all over Tennessee's record books for points and rebounds, and in Jarnell's case for double doubles, and the things he did on the court was pretty impressive under Konza Martin there. But I think Tennessee has a roster that right now I'm interested. I don't think I had this conversation with Eugene. I think it was with one of the guests that was on while you were traveling and stuff. But kind of looking ahead, and I think this plays off into your conversation about kind of what's the plan for Tennessee moving forward. I said that I think it was to one of the guests, Jack Foster, maybe was who I said it to. I am a little concerned about beyond this year. What happens the following season? I don't want to get too caught up in it because that's looking ahead, but I want to get through this upcoming season first and see what this upcoming season has for Tennessee. But the following year, like you're losing Josiah. I mean, assuming I don't imagine they'll come back, but you're losing Josiah, you're losing Vescovy after this upcoming season. Probably Camwa. Like I don't know that he'll stick around for another. Maybe he sticks around. Maybe he tries to go overseas or something. But you're at least losing Vescovy and James, in my opinion. I think Urosh will stick around. But then, I mean, you're losing some key contributors. Julian Phillips, I think, is gone. Tyreek Key obviously is gone. He's only got 1 year of eligibility left. But you're going to be replacing a lot of players, a lot of guys who are going to be key contributors and starters and logging a lot of minutes for you this year, the following year. And you don't have a whole lot right now, lined up to replace them that you know of. Again, this season you could reveal a guy like a Jonas Adu who's ready to take the next step, the following year too. Maybe a guy like Jemai Meshack takes the next step, or DJ Jefferson comes in and surprises or whatever. Like you have guys that on the roster, we just don't, they're question marks, but they could, step up and prove themselves this year. But all of my point to that is I'm wanting to enjoy the ride this year, but Gene, I do have concerns about if Tennessee, what they do in this 23 cycle, whether it's with high school kids or transfers or whatever. This 23 cycle is extremely important for Tennessee and the future of the program, because you're going to have to be replacing a lot of production after this 22-23 season. And the 23 cycle, I think we've said before in the podcast on the show, I kind of talk about how important the 23 cycle is for Tennessee, but it might be the most important cycle for Rick Barnes, just because I don't imagine he's going to be here after his contract runs out or after another 4 years or so. But it's important not just for him, but kind of the future of the program. If they can sustain having success and if sustain being stable and being a consistent top 4 team in the SEC, you've got to hit on the 23 class. You've got to bring in guys, again, whether it's recruiting or transfer portal, who are going to be, program staples for the next 2 or 3 years. In my opinion, you can't, to me, it's not a blessing in disguise, because Justin Edwards, it's a guy you want to get. That's a guy that, is a potential just all SEC freshman, even potential freshman of the year SEC player type of guy. So it's not a blessing in disguise they missed out on him, but maybe it's a blessing in disguise that they haven't had as much traction with some of the other kind of top 15, 20 prospects that they targeted in this 23 cycle, because maybe it's made them kind of readjust, or maybe in previous cycles, like again with Cason Wallace and Powell Bencaro and those guys that they missed on, they think maybe, we should target some other guys that are still extremely talented players, but that are going to be here for longer and have some more stability. But then again, who knows? Maybe those guys transfer out, because the 1 year transfer rule is, here to stay. And then heck, we maybe even getting one where you can transfer every year, Gene. Like that, I'm all for the one-time transfer rule. I don't know if I'm all for the you can transfer as many times as you want to for free. That one I'm a little iffy on, but I kind of just rambled. So feel free to ramble too if you want to. I don't know what point you want to take off that one.
So let me start with the last one. I was thinking while you were talking, I posed a question to you. Tennessee has Josiah and Vescovy as like program staples. Name another high-level program in the country that has like program staple players. Like let's look. National champion was Kansas. I guess you could say they had. They did. North Carolina, they've got the big man that's back. Duke doesn't exist. Kentucky,
yeah, like Gonzaga. That's a good one to point to for that type of thing.
Gonzaga doesn't really. Well, they've got Timmy.
Mm-hmm.
Timmy will be back. But if you look at the high-level programs in the country, a vast majority of them, very few of them actually have staples. And I think that that may be a thing of the past, which is why we have the conversation about what's the end game of um, what is Tennessee trying to accomplish over these next few seasons. Because it doesn't look as though that person exists. I mean, it's nice to have a kid for a few years, but um, and Ziegler would be a nice story, and he'll be probably the last remaining vestige of of a kid who a productive player who hangs around. Um, and and like I said, if it's really, this is where Barnes is a victim of his own circumstances. Because if he doesn't get Grant, if he doesn't get that group of guys, then nobody cares.
Right.
But like when you build a reputation of being a program developer because you got all these guys that come in and do things this certain way, now all of a sudden you're not doing it that way, but yet everybody gets still harping on, well, why don't you come to Tennessee? Rick Barnes is the greatest talent. Well, these kids are leaving after years. They don't care about that. They want to get the most high-profile games they can get. They want to go to a place that has a history of sending guys to the pros. Very few do it better than Kentucky and Duke right now. And you could actually make an argument that Gonzaga's up there because of Chet Holmgren, Jalen Suggs, guys like that, like pros, like legitimate pros. They may have a program that does it for a year or whatever, and but that doesn't necessarily exist that much. The feel good that is college basketball isn't quite as feel good as it once was. And it's interesting. I think I've said this before, but I had a conversation with a college coach recently that was telling me it was like Memorial Day, where he was like, don't be surprised if here in a few years, like the Power Five leagues just break off and there is no more NCAA tournament. Yep. And then so it was interesting. I think about a month ago, I saw guys like Jeff Goodman and Gary Parrish, these discussions are being had. And that would stink. But like college basketball is not what it was 10 years ago. College basketball would love nothing more than to hate Christian Laettner or Grant Hill or, JJ Redick, or just name, Woj, just name a Duke player from the 90s or 2000s. They just wish that they had somebody that they could hate in college basketball. Doesn't exist. The only reason they hate somebody now is because they hung around too bad. So now they hung around too long. So now they find reasons to poke holes in their game so the kid stinks and he's not actually a good player. And so college basketball that was probably the best part of the whole Grant Williams, Admiral Schofield experience, is that teams had people to hate. When Tennessee goes on the road and beats Florida, and all the guys are doing the Gator chop to the student section, you're around long enough for people to hate you, because somebody's going to hate you in 8 months. I just always I laugh when all these kids are repping these schools and they talk about the rivalries, and I'm like, my man, you were there for 8 months. You're there for 8 months. How can you sit here and talk about it when it matters? Like when I hear Jalen Rose tell stories about his time at Michigan, I'm like, yeah, he was there for 3 years. And last time I checked, he wasn't exactly a saint during his time there. None of those guys were. But you know what? They've got memories. They've got stories. They became legendary without winning a championship. They won nothing of relevance. They won nothing of note. Maybe they won a Big Ten while they were there. I don't know. But they won nothing of consequence, and everybody remembers them. Everybody hates them. Now we're at a point where we're just going to go play the games. Like the mid-major leagues, that you'll have players that, to hate. But the problem is those kids, they get good. They're there for a year or two, and then they just get bumped up to whatever. Like UTC's best player goes to Gonzaga. You get kids who spend a year or two at a higher level school. It doesn't work out. They go down. So you've got kids that have, and look, I'm not complaining at all. Let's be clear. excuse me, I'm just actually speaking on kind of the state of college basketball now.
Hmm.
But yeah, like it does lead to trying to, like the baseball term, which you can't tell the players without a scoreboard. Well, year to year, you can't tell the basketball teams without a roster. And, I need all the game notes. I need the media guide. I need the game day program. You need it all because it could change. And so it makes it tough. But again, I just think, when you look at what's going on, like that's why it doesn't really matter if you maybe you'll win out on a kid, maybe you don't win out on a kid. If they're the sort of kids that Tennessee's going after in the summer, they typically don't get. Like they don't get. I mean, you get Kennedy Chandler, yeah. You've got the Johnson and Springer kids who had nice seasons, but they weren't they're in their they're going to get their chance in the league. I think they're too talented to not, but it's not like they took college basketball by storm. Like you saw those three kids from Duke a few years ago, Cam Reddish, and RJ Barrett. That's kind of taking college basketball by storm. I think Kentucky did much last year. I don't remember, to be honest with you. I don't. But like when you see these kids that immediately come in and make an impact, like nationally, not just around the league and stuff like that. And I don't know how that changes because, it's going to take a few years. Like in a normal world, you were talking about Josiah and Vescovy and what happens maybe with the roster after this season. Those kids wouldn't have an option in a normal world because they'd all be gone after this season. Now, because of the COVID year, they've got an extra year back. That helps some of these kids, but they spend 3 years at school A, and then with the COVID year, they transfer to another school. Maybe school A doesn't have a graduate program or whatever. Like there's reasons. I'm just kind of stating the facts. Like, not everybody has the opportunity to be hated for 4 or 5 years. And most of these kids are leaving after a year or two. And look, we've allowed it. We wanted to give the kids some freedom. And again, I'm all about, there's nothing I care more about than choice. The choice to make their own decisions. There's nothing I care about more in life. And that's in all things, all facets. Having the freedom to make a decision. Maybe that decision is wrong, but we've given the players the license to leave after a year. Maybe go down or be great for a year and work your way up, or then go pro or whatever. And as a result, like college basketball is essentially a mess because we just don't know where kids are going to be year to year. You look at the recruiting and it's tough on these kids. Like if you're the best of the best, like Tennessee's not going after the kids right now who are probably Tennessee level players, but Tennessee's not quite ready to make that jump yet. I mean, they're going to go after the one and done types, the top 50 types. And then once the dust is settled and the first wave has made their decision, they'll have their second wave. And I think that's where Tennessee will cash in with a bunch of really great prospects because they've been too good of a program. The last 2 seasons, if I recall, they've basically done all their recruiting from the time the season ended until the time the next season began.
Feels like it, yeah.
Like how many kids you take out? Kennedy Chandler,
BJ Edwards, those are guys that committed early.
Meshack.
Yep. But you're right. I mean, the vast majority of the last 2-3 cycles have been guys that are in like the spring signing, not the fall signing kind of period.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to go back to Keon and Springer, and guys like that, but like it's Adu, it's Huntley Hatfield, it's all these kids. Because they just got Phillips. It's Phillips. Julian Phillips, not Cade Phillips. I think that's name.
You look at this class and you just mentioned, you got Julian Phillips, you got Tobe Awaka, DJ Jefferson. Like those are all really everybody in this class except for BJ Edwards were all guys that are added I think after the season was over for Tennessee, like after they had finished playing the last game of the NCAA tournament, Tennessee added everyone else except BJ Edwards in this class.
Yeah, I would say just wait and march through Bobby Mason's roster, but I've seen that team. They were not very good this year aside from Blue. And again, I'm not saying to be funny. Like they typically, if you look,
Mm-hmm.
Tomba, Huntley Hatfield, guys like that were all kids who reclassified.
Mm-hmm.
And look, Bobby's 2024 group was really talented. His 2023 was not. He had Blue Kane and a bunch of kids who were playing up at least one grade. So I don't see much in terms of reclassification there. And obviously Blue's going to Georgia Tech. Best of luck to him. But I mean, yeah, you look and it's just like you don't know where it's necessarily going to come from, but 80%, 75% of the recruiting for Tennessee happened from the time the season ended until the time the next season began. And so, you're at a point now where it's like, yeah, you swing and miss a little bit early, but the last time I checked, Tennessee went further than Kentucky last year, who got a lot of their prospects early, as opposed to Tennessee, who got all of their prospects late.
You said something when we were talking earlier that I wanted to build off of. So I've been just kind of thinking about it for a while, talking about looking at programs who have the staples of the program and kind of names that have been there for a while. We both obviously mentioned Gonzaga, and I also mentioning, but I didn't mention at the time, Villanova is another one that comes up with this past year. Look at a guy like Colin Gillespie and Justin Moore, who were there for several years for Nova. I've often thought for years, especially with when Tennessee had the success with Grant Williams and Admiral and that group. It's easier said than done, but am I off base in saying that I think Tennessee would have more success trying to build like a Gonzaga and Villanova? Doesn't have to be the exact roster construction they do, but doing more like that where they have the occasional, like Chet Holmgren, for example, they have guys who are one and done, but they're not, you're not doing it like a Kentucky, a Duke, a UNC, a Kansas, who every single year has one, maybe two, maybe three one and done type guys, and 2 or 3 first round draft picks almost every year. I think Tennessee is, to me, better served because of their history and because of the teams they go up against year in, year out for recruiting here in the South, especially. I think they're better off trying to build more like that. And again, easier said than done. It's easier to say let's build like Villanova and Gonzaga than to actually go do it. But I think if anyone has the ability to do that, it's Rick Barnes. And I think, again, it showed itself the most with that Grant Admiral, Jordan Bone, Cal Alexander group. And I think, again, here you can point to Vescovy and Josiah as guys that are beneficiaries of that type of thinking too. I think Tennessee just isn't a better spot or is more equipped to build that way than try to build, as you said, like trying to go after those same guys like Kentucky and UNC and Duke want. And it's fine to go after a few of them. And Tennessee's had, again, they got Kenny Chandler. That was a guy that Duke wanted, for example, Memphis wanted, some really high profile programs wanted. Tennessee got them. They got Keon and Jaden. But I still think that your bread and butter for Tennessee is built on the guys like Wayne Chisholm, the guys like Grant Williams. Those are guys that, well, Grant wasn't really high tab, but Wayne Chisholm wasn't, again, he wasn't a slouch in the recruiting. Like, people thought he was a highly rated prospect, but he wasn't a one and done. He was never thought of as a one and done type of guy. So I think Tennessee's better off in those recruiting waters that way anyway. And that's not just me saying it because Tennessee's missed out on some of these guys. I've always thought that. I don't know if I've ever said it on the show, but I know I said it when I worked at RTI, that I thought Tennessee's better off trying to build that way. Again, I know you can say it, doesn't mean it's easy to do, but I just think where Tennessee is, Gene, and kind of the program they are, it's easier for them to build that way than it is to try to go land it, because like you said, they don't have the track record to point to a bunch of NBA guys every single year. You've got some guys, you're getting more now, and that's great, and that is definitely elevating the profile of your basketball program. But Tennessee has a lot of, you can't just erase what happened in the 90s, what happened in the early 2000s. Like that obviously these kids don't know that, but you still, like, even the past 10, 15 years of Tennessee, when these kids have been alive and paying attention, it's anywhere close to the same prestige as what a Kentucky, a Duke, a North Carolina, heck, even like a Florida or an Auburn has even done in the last 10, 5, 10, 15 years. So I don't know. I just think to me it's always made more sense for Tennessee to kind of recruit and do more like what the Villanovas and Gonzagas have done in years past. Heck, even Butler back in the Brad Stevens days, like that obviously didn't get sustained like you thought it might have. But that was a team that made it to Final Four, in a short period of time twice. And it got really close to a championship game, I guess, once or twice as well. So I just think it's more sustainable to me, and more makes more sense for Tennessee to try to build that way than it does to try to follow the examples of what the Dukes and North Carolinas and Kentuckys and those types of schools have done and are currently doing still too on the recruiting trail.
Tennessee gets left at the altar. Tennessee
Yeah.
gets Tennessee ends up being the also ran a lot. I feel like they've spent so much time trying to keep up with the elite of the elite, but that's not what made you who you were. Like there's certain programs that will be great because of the program. Duke, Carolina, although occasionally you'll have the coach they had in like the late 90s, early 2000s, that was Doherty, would not be great. UCLA, even with their struggles, you typically expect them to be good, and we'll see what happens with Mick Cronin. I mean, he's obviously had him in the Final Four during COVID. Like Tennessee doesn't have that.
No.
Like, and you want to go back 25 years, you go from Kevin O'Neal, who struggled, Jerry Green, whose record looks better than actually the records don't reflect how talented those teams say that. Buzz Peterson struggled. Bruce Pearl was great. Conzo Martin, mostly struggled, had the Sweet 16 run, so that kind of makes it kind of overshadows what was not a great era. Donnie Tyndall, we know how that ended, and Rick Barnes, who struggled for 2 years and then has built them to something. 57 wins in those 2 seasons. They were, really, really highly regarded last year, very close to the Elite Eight. Sweet 16. Sweet 16. Very close to the Sweet 16. But like, there's no expectation of success because you walk into the Tennessee program. Like, exists. Like, it's contingent on the coach. When Rick Barnes first got there, everybody, was what was it? Retirement Rick was what I heard when I first got on the beat. When I first got on the Tennessee beat, like, it was Retirement Rick. And then all of a sudden Rick won 26 games in the season. And it's like, maybe. And then they won 31 games next season. And it's like, oh man, we're elite. And then the recruiting, everybody's like, oh man, we're recruiting at a 5-star level, even though most of these 5-star guys are in the 20s and 30s. I get it. Like, there was a lot of feel good around the program, but a lot of this, I don't know if you change anything. I don't think you can. I just think that for the program building aspect of it, then you look and you have to ask yourself, was the year like the year, maybe it was COVID, but was there truly a benefit to bringing in Springer and Johnson, knowing they were leaving after 8 months? Would things have been different if COVID hadn't happened? I don't know. I don't know how if the season goes different. Like, there were issues. Fulkerson got knocked out in the game.
Yep.
Didn't get to play in the NCAA tournament. Maybe there's a run, but that was a preseason with top 10 team that got beat in the first round and only won didn't even win 70% of his games that year. I'm not gonna go win-loss because last time I checked, I mean, everybody played fewer games. I think they won like 18-9 was their record or whatever the case may be.
You're exactly right. 18-9.
So yeah, like I'm looking at it and I'm like it's an identity crisis. And I don't know if anybody knows what the end game is. And then, of course, We're now talking about about Rick Barnes, like coaching mortality. How much longer is he going to hang around? What's what state is it going to be in when he because I think going forward, whenever a change is made, like you've got to find, the next coach or the next set of assistant coaches that Tennessee brings in have to be so portal savvy and have previous connections.
Yep.
I don't know what happens with South Carolina this year, but Lamont Paris got the number one player in the class for 2023 classified.
Yeah, How about your boy Lamont? That was just such a weird. I mean, no, it was because basically he's reclassifying and UNC didn't have a spot, but like that's still impressive. South Carolina of all teams got the number one player.
It was gift wrap for him. I mean, that was always the plan, was for the kid to go. And it doesn't matter. Like, that's Lamont's win. That's Lamont's game. And and that's a guy who is a really good recruiter. I always tell a story. Tyler Hero was going to Wisconsin. Lamont Paris leaves Wisconsin to go to UTC. Hero decommits and ends up in Kentucky. And obviously we know the rest. Legend is that Hero was not decommitting as long as Paris was there. It's just fine. It is what it is. Maybe it's just Hero saying it, and who really cares at this point. But, like, you've got to be portal savvy. And who knows? I mean, I think it's probably speculation that, whenever the break happens between the powers, the power 50, 60, 65, 64 plus Vandy, when that group kind of breaks off, maybe they'll change the rules where you only can transfer once, because you're not just going to keep passing players back and forth.
Yeah.
Transfer from school A to school B, you'll have to sit out of you. You transfer down, you can play. It's like football used to be. You transfer from Alabama to Tennessee, you gotta sit out of you. Transfer from Alabama to UTC, you can play immediately. And maybe that's what happens. Who knows? But I mean, everybody's just kind of passing players here and there. All the rules have changed, and that's fine. But like, I'm looking at a Tennessee program that, there's a lot to be excited about, like, for this season. You've got experience, you've got size. I kind of like your guard depth. Still some questions there, in my opinion. How good will the Phillips kid be? Where does the Phillips kid fit in? Because that was a kid who was probably going to LSU with the expectation to start. Now the kids at Tennessee, where they seem to be okay at the positions that you would likely play. Maybe they move Olivier to the 5 and play small with Josiah and Phillips and Olivier. Go with Vescovy and Ziegler. Maybe that's what they do. I don't know. I mean, guys like Basilio, who've been probably a lot more connected than I am these days, would know a whole lot more about that than I. But I mean, I'm just kind of spitballing different ideas. But you do have options, and you have the chance to have a very talented team this year. Now, after this year, let's just be honest, Phillips is likely gone. The other two kids, the two junior/seniors, Vescovy and James, they technically have a year left. But how long do you want to stay in college if you likely already graduated? And you have, like, people who actually want you and beyond there, beyond college. We'll see about Olivier. We don't know, but like, questions exist, and you can keep on just like plugging in holes of transfers, take swings at top 20, top 30 prospects, maybe land the top 50. Maybe that works itself out for you. But at the end of the day, like, I do think that the days of that, like, those feel good guys, those guys that make it to senior day, I think that those days, like, let me rephrase that. Those guys that make it to senior day as a member of your program since day one.
Yeah, right.
You got guys that make it senior day. They may start their career at UTC, play there 2 years, crush it there, and move up, or they may go somewhere else and transfer to Tennessee. You've got a kid like Justin Powell, who at that point may end up in Tennessee for his fifth year, his fifth school, whatever. I don't know. Maybe Washington State doesn't work out for him either, and he transfers again. Maybe he ends up in Tennessee, but I just don't think the kids exist very much now where they go to a school, they're there for 4 or 5 years, and they keep it moving. They move on. And very few schools have that. Kansas had it this year, and guess what? They won a national championship.
Mm-hmm.
Baylor kind of had that the year before, kind of. Guess what? They won a championship. That Carolina team that lost in the championship game. That UCLA team was not a bunch of those guys, that Final Four team a few years back. That Gonzaga team was a mix. So it's more and more likely that you're going to have teams that look like Arkansas. And I'm always careful when people are like, oh man, Arkansas or Bama. Like, first of all, Bama builds this thing from the bottom. Be clear. Like they'll go grab a couple of transfers, and I haven't looked too much at their roster for this season. Maybe they've got 9 transfers I don't know about. But they go out, they recruit like the high school ranks pretty heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these schools do. And I don't know what Tennessee actually does. Maybe, I guess they recruit. They take some swings in the summer, and then they try to convince some kids to reclassify in the spring, and they bring in some transfers. I guess that's what their plan is. I guess that's what a lot of people's plan is.
Yeah, I was going to say that to me, it feels like basketball especially is such a uniquely, really, I guess, kind of bad situation when it comes to kind of an identity crisis, because basketball, you have, like, let me phrase it this way. Football, you have 85 scholarship players. Like you said, you're going to have transfer and stuff out, but it's going to be a much smaller percentage and proportion of your roster because you have such a huge roster. You're going to have, like you said, more guys make it from start to finish to senior day there, because you have such a huge roster that you get attached easier to more guys because there are more guys to root for. Even in baseball, like there's 30, 40, I actually don't know like the roster sizes usually for college baseball. There's still significantly more in college baseball and softball than there is in basketball, where you have 13 scholarship players on the men's side. And that's it. Like it's if you lose 2 guys, that's a significantly larger percentage of your roster than losing 3-4 guys in football. Like, it's just hard to, like you said, I think it's almost kind of, to me, it's going to be pretty commonplace really rare for teams to have just like 1 or 2 guys. Like, I think it's gonna be very commonplace for you to have to every single year just about replace 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 guys year in, year out because of graduation, because of declaring early for the NBA draft, and because of transfers. I just think we're at that spot now where it's not a red flag when you have 6 guys you have to replace or 6 open roster spots. It's that's just how things are now. Like 5-6 years ago, if Tennessee had to replace 6 guys, it's more than likely because something like a coaching change happened, or something happened to where guys are leaving and vacating because they're getting out of here. Now, past couple of years, Tennessee's had 6-7 guys to replace, and it's not like what's Rick Barnes doing? It's this is just kind of the way things are now with the transfer portal. And I think it's been the case for a lot of schools. And again, some of it's different, like Kentucky having guys go to the NBA draft has been more because of that than transferring out. But still, like, I think it's becoming a lot more commonplace for schools to have to make, I wouldn't say wholesale changes, but have pretty significant roster, like identity changes between each year moving forward because of how easy it is to transfer. And I think it's a lot more exacerbated in basketball because you have such smaller roster sizes in basketball than you do really any of the other major, sports in college athletics.
Yeah. And one thing that I've noticed is, you only have 13 roster spots, but in basketball, one player can change everything.
Yep.
Like, you'll have a player that can completely just take over college basketball so many times now. Like, you can, and look, I can spitball names going back forever. Like, Carolina, where is Carolina if Brady Manick doesn't transfer? The year before, the guard for Baylor that ended up with the Kings, that transferred from Auburn, Mitchell. like I can't remember who there was no tournament in 20, so that's why I can't remember who the team was. 19 was Texas Tech losing to Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Virginia, that was a pretty much team. That was a team that was kind of, and pretty much since COVID was when really things really changed as far as transfers were concerned. Because in years past, it's always just been your more experienced teams win in March. But yeah, the last two champions, or at least finalists. I mean, Kansas doesn't typically bring in transfers. I mean, he's gonna, for all of his faults, he typically brings kids in and he, develops those kids.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, there's not a sport where one player changes. I mean, it's, the superstar is the second most important position in all of sports, the basketball superstar, right behind quarterback. And, and it's, if you have one of those guys who has the ability to take over a game, like the guard from Kansas that I think was most outstanding player in the Final Four. I'm just going to avoid. He was number 30. I'm just not going to try to pronounce his name.
You're talking about,
his
yeah.
initials are O-A. Those are his initials. But you have a guy like that can be so dominant and so good. Like even Duke, like Duke had Ben Carroll. And part of the reason they didn't make it to the championship game is because your superstar kind of shrunk in the big moments. NBA, you're a Celtics guy. Where's Jason Tatum? Last time I saw him, he was hanging out with like the Warriors guys at that white party that the former Sixers owner had.
Yeah.
Or actually, no, he was at some movie show. I don't remember which one. But yeah, I mean, like, so if you can get that guy, that's why I always argue. Like, I mean, I understand that everybody just loves point guards now, and but if you have a kid who can play both a 6'5" to 6'7", whatever wing that can play multiple positions and be good on both sides of the court, that's what wins you championships at every level. Every level. Like Steph Curry with the Warriors is the only example. We can go back as long as ever. And especially at the highest level, you've got Giannis, you've got guys like that who are constantly, LeBron, Kawhi, all those guys. Those are the guys who are winning you championships. But Tennessee has at least one of those in Josiah, a kid who can be really good on both ends. And if the Phillips kid is better than Josiah, being honest, if Phillips is better than Josiah, then Tennessee could be really, really good.
Yeah. That's a big if, but you're right. If
you can make all of the everybody, and look, man, like I'm spending my life around guards. And I'm hanging around at basketball things, and I'm talking to people, and it's like point guards, guards. And I'm just thinking the entire time, I'm like, two-way wings, man. Two-way wings will win you championships. Two-way wings will win you championships. And so, and when you find, if one of those kids hits the free agent market, which is what I call a transfer portal, if one of those kids hits the market and you can get one of those kids, got a chance, but you have to go get those kids, which is why, like, I just think that recruiting is never going to be the same again, because who do I want? Do I want the 17-year-old kid who looks good, or do I want a kid who's been in college for 2 years, who was ranked just as high as that kid over there, but he's got 2 years of college experience and maybe wasn't developed? If he's a head case, no, I'm good. But if he's questionable case, not a complete head case, you can take a chance on that. And if you get those kids, you always got a chance. So I don't know what the future is in Tennessee with recruiting and that stuff, but you're always going to have to leave a couple spots available, because you never know when that sort of kid's going to hit the free agent market. Maybe he was under recruited coming out of high school and he had to go to like a Southern Conference school or a West Coast Conference school or whatever the case may be. Or maybe he was highly regarded, didn't like his role. 1 year, maybe he was promised some stuff that first year. He didn't get it. He leaves immediately. I mean, like you see a kid commit to a Kentucky or whatever, and you're like, yeah, we'll see where they are next year. Because maybe they go pro, maybe they hit the portal.
I think to your point, Tennessee's probably pretty attractive to a kid like that next year in the transfer portal. If you're assuming you lose Julian Phillips, Josiah Jordan James, and Vescovy, you get a lot of minutes there for a kid who, you said, a super talented, maybe all conference player at a smaller school, not too small, but like at a different school. Who, again, you mentioned has the same kind of build as a 6'5", 6'7" type of wing. I mean, Tennessee's, I think, going to be very appealing to a guy like, again, does that kind of guy hit the portal next year? Well, don't know, but Tennessee should be pretty appealing to a guy like that next year, because if you're losing your 6'6", kind of guy in Josiah, then another one in Phillips as well. But the thing I want to end the podcast on.
Let me
yeah, one more thing. Go ahead.
We end it. No, I was just going to say this. You're 100% right. If Phillips is better than Josiah this year. Because if Phillips is better than Josiah, then now you're talking about the elite sort of 6'8" wing that goes and, that crushes it. Like, Josiah is a really good player, but we've seen the positives and negatives of his game. He's a good shooter, not a great finisher. He's a great defender. Mm-hmm. He's a role player. So if Josiah is exponentially better than the Phillips kid this coming season, then who knows? But if Phillips goes out there and he crushes it, and maybe he's a lottery pick or whatever, or just like an early first round pick, maybe 15 to 20, whatever, anywhere in that top 20 range, now you're talking about it. Now you make Tennessee that much more attractive, because people have questions about what does a Julian Phillips look like in Tennessee? Those are questions that do exist. And what does that look like there? Because they get guards, they get bigs. Guards always seem to do well. The bigs never seem to be happy. That's not me saying it. I mean, let's just look at the history over the past 3-4 years. Mm-hmm. Like, they've lost more bigs than, they've lost, 5 bigs? I'm just throwing out a number, but.
Yeah, I mean, it feels about that way. DJ Burns, excuse me. Right. Punley Hatfield. Right. There's been a couple other ones. Those are the first two off my head. Yeah. Tamba, yeah.
So, yeah, and like maybe it's just 3. But how many have they recruited in that time too?
Right.
Right. So, like, I mean, like, you kept Euros, mm-hmm. and that's basically it. Pember, you count Pember.
Yeah, I count Pember. Maybe he's 6'10", so yeah, I'd count him. Sure.
Met his dad over a couple weeks ago. Really, really great guy. He coached my son's AAU team, ironically. So, but yeah, I mean, you're talking about. Like, that's kind of the knock. Like, people don't have enough they don't have enough information to make a determination on what Tennessee does with wings, that they highly regarded wings. Huntley Hatfield was a top 25 player when he reclassified. That didn't work out great. It's decent, not great. The guards have done well. Every guard has done well. That's come in as a one and that's come in and been a one and done. They have their highs and lows. They're 18-year-old freshmen. I wouldn't expect anything less. But Keon Johnson, Jaden Springer, and Kennedy Chandler, they all had, for the most part, they were worth the investment. But you don't have any information on what a Julian Phillips can do in this system at this school. And that's yet to be determined. But if he goes out there and he puts up nice numbers, has some real highlight moments, because it's not about averaging 20 points a game. Can he average like 11 points a game, maybe 4 or 5 rebounds, a couple of assists, shoot some nice percentages from the field and show promise. If he does those things, he's going to be a lottery pick. All what it is. He's already kind of projected to be, just off of like recruiting rankings, he's already projected to be a top 20 pick in the draft. If he crushes it, then all of a sudden you're going to see kids from like Loyola Chicago's of the world, hit the portal. You'll see a Big East kid hit the portal, and you'll see Tennessee in there. And, if your Tennessee's coaching staff, which, hopefully doesn't have any turnover after this coming season, then they can sit there and say, well, look at what we did with Phillips. And that's an opportunity to present. That's an opportunity which, to your point, makes Tennessee that much more appealing because they're likely losing one kid at that position.
Yeah, that was a really good caveat by you in terms of what would actually, why Tennessee would be or wouldn't be appealing to that type of kid for next year. I want to end on this. We didn't get a chance to talk about any of the schedule stuff. But that's fine because we had to me, I think, a really good discussion about recruiting for the whole hour of the show here. But something that I always think is a really kind of sobering stat that, I hate bringing up because it, makes you feel bad. But to me, it kind of brings you back down to earth a little bit when you're a Tennessee fan thinking Tennessee should be in these types of battles, should be landing these types of guys. And it's fine to want more. It's fine to expect big things from the school or the team you root for in any sport. That's fine. I'm not saying lower your expectation that you have to. I just think, to me, this is a stat that I kind of, as always kind of in the back of my head personally, when I'm thinking of expectations for Tennessee when it comes to recruiting and it comes to as a program in general. This is a list of teams that have had the most NCAA tournament appearances without reaching a Final Four. BYU is number one with 30. They've made 30 NCAA tournament appearances and never made a Final Four. Both Xavier and Xavier and Missouri are tied behind BYU with 28 appearances each without a Final Four. And then the number 4 spot is Tennessee. Tennessee has been to the NCAA tournament 24 times. 24 times. No Final Fours and only one Elite Eight in program history. Right behind them is Creighton at 23, and then at 22 you have Alabama and Utah State. So that's just kind of those are not elite teams. I mean, Creighton's had some pretty good teams in the years past. Alabama, again, they've had some pretty good teams recently, but they were garbage in basketball for a long time. BYU's had some pretty decent teams, but again, nothing to really write home about. Xavier's been a really good A-10 program. Have had some really good teams, some really good Sweet 16 teams over the last 10, 15 years. But again, no Final Four. Missouri has had some really good teams in the years past too. No Final Four. Tennessee is right up there with those programs. And Tennessee is recruiting better than any of those programs currently, except for, you could argue, Alabama right now, obviously. But I just think, Gene, to me, that's until that changes, until Tennessee gets off that list like Auburn did a couple years ago, because they were on that list too in terms of, I think they had close to 20 NCAA tournament appearances that make it Final Four. Until Tennessee can do that and get their name off this list of most tournament appearances without our Final Four, it's hard for me to set the recruiting expectations or transfer portal expectations too high. Again, I'm all for expecting better, expecting great things from Tennessee basketball, from Tennessee football, from anything. Tennessee football and Lady Vols basketball, they have a history of winning titles, of competing at the highest possible level you can compete at in their respective sport. Tennessee men's basketball doesn't. One Elite Eight appearance, and they're fourth currently in, I guess technically all time, but fourth in NCAA tournament appearances without ever reaching a single Final Four. There's so many schools, George Mason, for example, Florida Gulf Coast, I think, no, maybe not them, but George Mason is one that comes to mind. Yeah, those teams have Final Four appearances. Tennessee doesn't. That also leads to, discussion about how much of a crapshoot the NCAA tournament is. But it also, 24 times, Gene, and 0 Final Four appearances. That's not a good tracker. It also speaks to, people always want to rag on Rick Barnes. And I think, again, he definitely deserves criticism for things that have happened with him in March. But it's also, it's not just Rick Barnes. Tennessee as a program has had, just awful luck and also just bad performances in March, just year in and year out, it feels like. So I, again, just kind of wanted to close on that. I know it's a little bit of a downer of a note, but to me, just kind of, that's always a thing I go back to kind of reset my, I guess, perception of the Tennessee men's basketball program, as good as the last 5 years have been, especially. But really, you look at the last 15, 20 years even, Tennessee has as many Sweet 16 appearances as a lot of really high-profile programs. But Sweet 16 is great, but one Elite Eight and 0 Final Fours in that same period, where a lot of those same schools you've beaten out in terms of number of Sweet 16 appearances or right on par with, they have multiple Elite Eight appearances. They have maybe even multiple Final Four, maybe even multiple national championships. And Tennessee just has, the Sweet 16s and one of the eight they can kind of hang on. Finally won an SEC tournament for the first time in 40 something years. But even that, like that was the first time in 40 something years. So it's just, there's been a lot of recent success. I saw in the Vol Nation message board someone tried to compare Tennessee basketball to what Kentucky football is, and I don't think that's an apt comparison. But they're talking about comparing, Kentucky basketball and Tennessee football. Like they're trying to make comparisons between those two schools specifically. So I get where they're coming from. I think it's a little different because Tennessee basketball, men's basketball, has had more historical success than Kentucky football has, just in their respective sports. But I still think the overall point, I understood where they're coming from, was that Tennessee, they've had the success in the last 5-10 years, but they have a lot of not so great history. And I know kids, like most kids, like they're 15, 16, 17, they don't care a ton about what happened in the 90s and early 2000s. But I mean, that's still like their parents know. And I mean, it's hard to escape your past when your past has the Wade Houston era or the Kevin O'Neal era or the Buzz Peterson era. Like it's hard to escape your past when that's not too far in the past. That's not like that's like the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Like that's when I was alive. That's barely 30 years ago for some of those things, barely 20 years ago for some of those things. So to me, that's just always a sobering stat that Tennessee is fourth on the list of most NCAA tournament appearances without ever getting to a Final Four. That's not a list you want to be in a top 5 in. It's a list. It's a place you can change. All you gotta do is get the one. Easier said than done, though. But to me, that's kind of always what I go back to when I think of where Tennessee is historically and kind of where my expectations for them is. Until that changes, it's hard for me to put too high of expectations on their program. I mean, again, I will always say it. I'm never going to fault someone for expecting more. I will fault you if you think Tennessee should be 35-2 and winning, competing for titles every year. But I don't. I just, to me, it's hard to. There's a ceiling on my expectations for Tennessee men's basketball, and until they can break through that ceiling, that's where my expectations are going to have to stay for the program.
Yeah, I wish I had anything to add to that, but it's as simple as you got to win. This is a conversation that it's like talking about the freshman that looks good in practice, and everybody's like, "Well, can he do it on game day?" Well, let's wait till games actually start and we can answer that question. We're not going to be able to kind of do anything about that stat until you get into March and you see how the brackets lay themselves out and you see how the team performs in the games. Because, I mean, you just look at the most recent game. The Michigan game was a game that, I was traveling, I think, back from Pittsburgh that day, so I didn't see it, but I did hear it. I was listening to it on Sirius XM, and it wasn't like they just got embarrassed. It's not like Tennessee got embarrassed by Michigan. Yeah. Play here, a play there, a couple minutes here, a couple minutes there, and that was the difference in the game. They didn't lose that game because of their history. They lost that game because Michigan was just ultimately a better team. And Tennessee got a very unfortunate draw to draw a team that had underachieved at one point in the season and hit its stride at the right time. I just think that there's not a lot that we can do about it. But to your point, I think that'll always affect the perception of Tennessee's program. And, I think two things that are working against Tennessee in recruiting right now is back history and Rick Barnes' coaching mortality. I just think that both of those things collectively, because, people are just using against him. Well, how much longer does he really have? Yeah. What does he have, another 2 years left on his contract? No, I think he just signed that.
Yeah, he got an extension. He's got 4 or 5 years now.
Right. So when he finished that contract, they're going to use whatever they can, fair or foul. But I think that Tennessee's history, there's they're getting some players, but what are they doing with it? Second round NCAA tournament, first round NCAA tournament, maybe a Sweet 16 here and there. But 33% of the time they've made the NCAA tournament, they've made it to the Sweet 16 in their history.
Yeah, I think I remember looking up with you on the podcast before where they've made it to Sweet 16 as many times as they've been bounced in the first round. Like they've been one and done in the tournament as many times they've made to the Sweet 16. So like it's almost like I wouldn't say a boom or bust because again I wouldn't say Sweet 16 is boom, but it's either you're making it to the second weekend or you're gone for like it's not a whole lot in between for Tennessee in the NCAA tournament over the years at least.
Right. I just typed in how many Kentucky's been to almost 60 NCAA tournaments, and they've made the Sweet 16 45.
Wow.
So forget. I mean, even if you want to say that like the numbers worked out in their advantage earlier on when the field was smaller, which is 1,000% true. 75% of the time they make the NCAA tournament. They've made the Sweet 16. I believe like Calipari, even for all of his issues, whatnot, I believe he's only been beaten in the first weekend like twice in his time.
I think you're
That
right.
was even with like that one year that they had the the one year that they were like an 8 seed and they had to beat Wichita State, who was a 1 in the second round. Like I mean, in their history, like they've even Calipari for all of his issues. I mean, he got beat in 2016 in the second round, and he got beat
Yeah.
last year in the first round.
Yeah.
Now, I get it. He didn't make it in 2021, and he didn't make it in the 12-13 season. But that dude, no matter the seed, gets to the second round, second weekend. And so, like, some of that is luck. I get it. But I mean, like, eventually, like, Tennessee just has to keep taking swings. And eventually, I mean, they're going to connect.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to make that Elite Eight again. And they're going to make that Final Four again. Because, I mean, it's not like UCLA was one of the best teams in the country 2 years ago. Nobody ever thought of them as such. Carolina wasn't even a team that people thought about as a potential Final Four last year until they were. Like every single year, this team, you're not like, oh, well, of course it's those 4 teams. There's always a team that you're kind of just like, well, they just got hot at the right time. Even VCU and George Mason, when they made their runs, Loyola Chicago, they got hot at the right time. Like St. Peter's made the Elite Eight last year.
They least the Sweet 16. I can't remember if they made the Elite Eight or not. At least Sweet 16, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, okay, well, they won 3 games last year. So they made the Elite Eight. They got beat by Carolina in the Elite Eight. They beat Kentucky, Murray State, and Purdue. So,
yep. Okay.
So it's like, it's eventually going to work itself out. I don't know. I can't guarantee it's going to be this year. It's going to work itself out. It's a stat that nobody wants to hear, nobody wants to think about, but it's eventually going to work itself out. I don't know how. I don't know the details. I just think that if you consistently do things the right way, eventually they're going to work out in your favor. And I don't know what it's going to take, but I just know that Rick Barnes has done things the right way during his tenure in Knoxville. And so that makes him believe that things like that work themselves out whenever you do. So we'll see. Maybe it's at some point during the next 5 or 6 years with his contract. You certainly hope so, because he's been successful enough and will hang around long enough. I think we've done the show about how he's like the 3rd longest tenure coach in history, or 4th or something like that.
Yep.
We've done that show. And like, so it's eventually going to work itself out. I don't know the details. I don't know how. I just believe that will be the guy who had one minor misstep, which wasn't really a misstep in my mind, the whole UCLA thing. And that's the only blemish on his resume in Knoxville. to me, that's the guy that gets Tennessee over them, because he's done, to me, things the right way to not have the success to show. The postseason success.
Yeah. I was going to bring up a point, but I kind of want to, we've already talked for almost an hour and a half. I'm going to save it for next week's episode, Gene, because I think it's a good one to talk about. But I was thinking about kind of the new wave of basketball fandom for Tennessee was, obviously started with the Bruce Pearl era. And that kind of, I think, to me, set the expectations a lot differently for people around, kind of your my age, like in their 30s and, early 40s than our, my parents, for example, or even people who are just slightly older. Like, I think, obviously younger than me too, and like in the 20s currently. I think that era kind of made expectations a lot different for a totally different generation, new generation of Vol basketball fans that either didn't care or were actually fans of other programs like UNC and Duke and things like that, because they're, Tennessee football fans, but Tennessee men's basketball was garbage for a long time. And they were, probably as younger kids and stuff, or, teenagers or whatever, rooting for other programs. And then Bruce Pearl comes along and steals a lot of fans away and from those other programs, or, converts the Tennessee football fan into also a Tennessee basketball fan. So I think that I want to save that for next week, because I think that's worth a conversation of having. I think that the Bruce Pearl era was kind of a demarcation point for Tennessee generational basketball fans, in terms of, you can kind of tell who's a newer fan to me and who is an older fan, almost by their expectations. Not always, but almost by the expectations they have for the program. And a lot of it has to do with Bruce Pearl. So I think that's kind of, to me, I want to talk about that next week, because there's a lot I want to unpack, and we've already talked for a long time here. So, Gene, it's been great having you on. I knew this was going to happen, because it's the first time you've been on in a while, and you were going to talk a long time. So hopefully our listeners enjoy the hour and a half episode here. But again, I know it's basketball off season, but we had a lot to talk about. It's football time right now, but hopefully there's still plenty of basketball junkies out there who will get some enjoyment out of this episode. But again, Gene, thanks for coming on, man. It's great having you back on here. Thanks for all of you listeners, watchers, wherever whether it's YouTube or Apple Podcast or Spotify, however you're listening to the show. We greatly appreciate it, and thank you all so much for it. If you like this one, please leave a comment down below on the video, or add us on Twitter at VolHoopsFever, at me on Twitter at Mr._Rutherford if you want to as well. So would love to hear your thoughts on anything and everything we talked about here on the show. Signing off for Gene, I am Nathanael, and this has been another episode of Vol Basketball Fever. Thank you for watching Vol Basketball Fever. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel while you're here. We appreciate all your support, and the show wouldn't be possible without Vol fans like you. Thank you.